Welcome to the podcast, Jules.
Hey Jack, thank you so much for having me. This is great.
No, any chance to talk about ponds? What I feel I should address firstly is when I contacted you on Twitter, there was a thing in your bio about, I think, was it a 3D duck's vagina?
Are we going straight into that? Okay.
Well, you know what? Like that, I'm just the kind of person that caught my eye. And I just thought before we talk about ponds, because this has got nothing to do with it. What's that about?
What's the deal? A few years ago, I made like a virtual reality thing for the charity Frog Life. Okay, so
Yeah.
you're on a toad, and you go on this journey. The toad's trying to get across the road. You go on this journey. You go underneath the road, and it was all about connectivity and linking up wildlife habitats and the different ways we can do that. So it's really fun. In fact, it was in a lot of the London tube stations actually. This pop up exhibition, so it's really cool. But after doing that, I kind of had all of the sort of infrastructure. Digitally to turn that into something else. And I'd worked previously I did a book called Sex on Earth a few years back, and I worked with really amazing scientist called Patricia Brennan, who works on duck vaginas. And we were just having a chat, and she was like, do you know what? I've actually got a 3D model of a duck's vagina. And I was like, well, okay, should be pretty easy to just take out the 3D toad world and just replace it with this duck vagina. So that's what we did. It was, to be honest, I'm just unbelievably proud of it. I don't know why.
No.
It's just fantastic. It's complete. For a while, it was obviously fairly well. I say popular. It was fairly niche, but it was just a lovely way to sort of I don't know, talk about invertebrates in a fun way, really. Because same with ponds. Invertebrates they're all, that's where the fun is, really. 99% of it is invertebrates. So it's a way to sort of, I don't know, enjoy invertebrates in a slightly different way.
Yeah, no, I think you should be very proud of it as well. I mean, I'm very tempted to go and have a look at this now. I just saw duck vagina, thought, right, make a note of that. But now I know a little bit more about that. I will be looking for that
You know,
later.
I've got two stories conflated there. I'm thinking of flies now. There was a fly vagina one as well. But
You're
that one was
obsessed,
a little bit
Jules. You're
tricky. I
obsessed.
know that one was a little bit trickier. So here's me going on about invertebrates when we're talking about ducks. No, I think in a way it was just, it's just fabulous, really.
Yeah. That's how else would you describe it? Well, from duck vaginas to ponds, let's try and get back on topic. So the reason I contacted Jules is some of you probably be aware of this fantastic book that he did. The wild, I think, titled The Wildlife Pond book, wasn't it? There, and I got that a couple of years ago, and that helped me do my pond, and I'm sure a lot of other people did. So it made me think there's so many common myths and at this point legends about wildlife ponds and all these things around. I thought, well, let's throw some questions at Jules and let's see if there's any truth to it all. So one of the ones is plastic herons. Do plastic herons keep away herons? Because some people swear by it, and then I've seen conflicting evidence as well. But what do you think?
I When I was a kid, we never had a pond when I was a kid, but our neighbours had a pond and they had loads of herons visiting. And I remember seeing these plastic herons. This was the kind of late 80s, and they really sort of took off. Everyone needed to have a plastic heron. And it's a great example of how a lot of these things, it seems like there's scientific evidence for something. Well, there must be. It was in every garden centre. And actually, the RSPB at the moment, they suggest that it actually makes herons more likely to visit ponds because they're sort of scoping out perhaps reproductive opportunities and stuff. So yeah, I mean, like, if you like herons, get a fake heron. Sometimes they can, the decorative, sometimes you have like nice wire sort of mesh ones and stuff, and they can look kind of like sort of sculptures really in their own right. And there's no doubt about herons are so cool, aren't they? So sort of poised and just really, really I don't know, emblematic of wetlands. So if you want to have one, but it's not going to help much, is it?
No, I mean, if you don't know a lot about herons, obviously they breed communally, so they're not bothered about being near other herons. So I've got this theory, it's a big con with garden centres to keep getting you to buy expensive koi and goldfish. They sell someone a fake heron to encourage a heron to eat all their fish, and then like, oh, better go buy some more. I don't know, maybe I've got my tinfoil hat on, but as far as I'm aware, it's complete bollocks. So yeah, if you like,
I mean, I don't know much about goldfish or keeping
Yeah.
fish in ponds, to be honest. But I know it must hurt so bad when, you know, you're spending incredible amounts of money on these fish and then just to see it go down the throat of something and flies away, it must be so punishing, I suppose.
I was watching herons at a heronry a couple of years ago and I saw one cough up this massive coin. I thought, God, there's a couple of grand that someone's that someone's missed. But yeah, as a bird, I love herons. I think they're amazing. My main thing in my garden is my frogs, and I'd be a little bit sad if a heron cleared out all my frogs. But one or two's fine. That's nature, you know. But we'll see. I haven't seen one yet. And we're kind of mentioning fish there. So the other thing, and I guess I know a little bit about this as well, but a lot of people say fish are bad for wildlife ponds. So it's a broad statement, but are fish bad for ponds, or is it a little bit more complicated than that?
Well, put it this way, if you think about what ponds are, there's ponds that, you know, establish themselves and, you know, in the wild, I suppose, like a beaver pond or something like that, that's going to be there for a while. So there's going to be a lot of opportunities for things to move in, and fish are a natural part of that community. If you're going for a kind of seasonal pond, obviously, you know, you wouldn't necessarily have fish there. And so you'd have lots more invertebrates sort of swooping in to take advantage of the lack of fish there. So I agree. Some of the best ponds I know have loads of fish in them. Absolutely. So I think like sometimes there's a kind of it's a bit like, not exactly the anti-cat movement, but it's a very kind of like, okay, there is only one pond, and it is the pond that was in the wildlife book that my dad gave to me when I was 10. And, you know, I think, you know, a lot of this comes down to that really. So no, I love sticklebacks, are amazing. I absolutely love them. I just wouldn't necessarily introduce them artificially. If they get there, that's fine. But if not, you know, slightly different. What do you think? Because obviously, you know, fish, you've spent so much time with fish.
Yeah. Well, I'm probably a bit biased, aren't I? But I think it comes down to a couple of things. I think it depends on the species of fish. You know, a pike isn't going to be very good in a little wildlife pond. That's going to scoff everything. But, you know, something like a tench, which is quite passive. They don't chase things really. They just scrub around. I think tench are fine. I think the size of the pond makes a difference. The rule of thumb I go by is if your pond is smaller than a bathtub, probably not a good idea to have fish. It's too small. And if you've got a pond maybe the size of, I don't know, 5 by 5 meters, you've got a little bit more wriggle room. But I also think the amount of cover that you have in your pond makes a huge. If you've got a really well weeded pond with lots of rocks and hiding places, then there's no reason why you can't have dragonfly larvae and tadpoles with certain kinds of fish. So, for example, my wildlife pond has crucians in it and tench, and I've still got newts and tadpoles and dragonfly. They all get on fine, but it's heavily weeded. There's a lot of places for them to. If it was just a barren kind of nothing in there, then I think stuff would get eaten. So, yeah, it's not black and white. I would say it depends on species, size, lots of factors, but you can have fish in a pond with wildlife. I guess it depends on your own expectations of what you want from it, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I agree. I think that's one of the real challenges when you're giving advice is to make the advice simple enough to digest, but also if people are interested, letting them know that, you know, there are ways of doing most things with ponds. It just takes a little bit more sort of complex thought really. And with that book, you know, the Wildlife Pond book, that's kind of what I try and do is, you know, here's the basics, but there is a lot more to ponds than just, you know, a 10-step guide to dig in it, you know? Years ago, I used to, when I first went freelance, pretty much my entire job was visiting schools and showing them pond animals and then encouraging the teachers to dig a pond. And there was definitely this sort of trend of I would revisit after a year. I did, you know, work with, in the end, like thousands of schools. It was brilliant. It was really amazing. But what you'd find sometimes if you happen to revisit a school a year later, in about, I don't know, a quarter of cases, one of the parents or one of the teachers has said, come on, let's get them fishing. Let's get those fish in there. We'll give you some fish. Come on, we've got these lovely fish. And then you'd go back and dip that pond and your sort of heart would, you know, it would sort of sink really, because, you know, in a new pond where there's, as you said, there's not as many hiding places, you know, it was a completely different feel if fish were there. They were loving it, of course, but you know, less so.
Yeah, gold, and that's the funny thing. Goldfish are one of the worst ones, really. They are buggers for it. So yeah, wouldn't recommend goldfish for a wildlife pond really. And It's not all going to be about fish. I will end on for this one, but with fish reaching ponds, because one of the classic things is fish eggs on ducks' feet. But I don't know if there's any scientific. It's one of those kind of things that you hear everywhere. Wherever you go, people are, oh yeah, that's how they got there. But like, is there any actual research, or is this someone down the pub talking out their arse? You know.
Yeah, I think it's really, I don't know as much about other areas of sort of wildlife gardening.
Yeah, okay.
I sometimes wonder where these things come from, whether it is one established book or somebody who's very a real authority, maybe 50 years ago, and lots of people respect that person, and they say it in a throwaway way, and that becomes the sort of established advice. You know, it's amazing.
Yeah, I mean, because from what I understand, fish eggs are really delicate, and they're not going to survive going up in the air, drying out and going. So unless that pond is right next to another water body, it's unlikely. But although there was a paper last year actually about how some carp eggs would survive through the digestive tract of a duck when it ate them. So it's not so much that the ducks are bringing them on their feet, but it could be they're crapping them out. And the occasional egg is making it that way. So
but that's also the case with snails. You know, there's a couple of species of snails whose eggs can travel, and as adults, actually, the actual snails can travel all the way through the digestive system. So it may be. I agree. I that's personally where I would be most interested. Yeah, absolutely.
There's a sprinkling of truth in it, then maybe, but I don't know the exact research behind it. And kind of sticking with ducks now as well, but duckweed, is it good or bad for ponds? Some people, because you can buy duckweed online, which makes me like, why are people buying this? But then, some people absolutely love it. Some people loathe it. Is it a bad thing for ponds?
Well, it's a natural thing, and that definitely does move around, as with birds. So in a lot of ways, there's no reason to kind of fight it. It's gonna, if you're looking to get an established pond, it's only a matter of time before it will make it in. I actually quite like it. It's definitely a personal choice here. I used to do RHS Hampton Court and just speak to like thousands of pond owners, and everyone was like, that was the most common pair of questions, by far, was how do you get rid of duckweed? How do you get rid of blanketweed?
Yeah.
So in a lot of ways, I've tackled it recently in my own pond by kind of clearing it out to about a third. So in the summer, this time of year, I expect about a third of it to be there. It's really good for, there's a type of weevil beetle that, only lives on duckweed. Loads of newts and also tadpoles. You sometimes see them hiding underneath, don't you? And is that the same for fish? Do fish do that as well?
Yeah, they'll use it for cover, certainly. Yeah.
It has that kind of three-dimensional kind of structure to it as well. So it's almost like a mangrove, isn't it? For that sort of inch underneath, with all of the sort of roots descending. It's like a lovely little sort of underwater meadow almost. I'm massively kind of for it, I suppose.
Okay.
No, I've noticed. Well, I was going to say, like, sometimes pond planting can sort that out. So in the last couple of years for our pond, the water lilies have really started to take off, and water soldiers as well naturally have that kind of, the upward pointing legs, if you like, make a sort of boundary that duckweed finds it more difficult to sort of squeeze into. So you still have those patches of open water without necessarily getting that thick surface.
I did have a Zola in my mum's garden pond, which I know is similar to duckweed, but that's non-native, and that's a little bit worse. But I found that was like an 80s action hero. You just couldn't get rid of the bloody thing. Like I tried scooping it out, and I left it, because with duckweed, I know if you leave it at the side of the pond, it will dry out relatively quickly. But a Zola just keeps going. It just was, I have to get the flamethrower on the bloody thing or something.
That is like a blanket, isn't it?
You get like 2 or 3 inches thick of it. It completely. So that is really. But if you've got a Zola, you want to try and get rid of that. To be fair, so far the only foolproof way I've found to get rid of a Zola is starting again, which is not what people probably want to hear. But you get a little speck of that in your pond. I don't think there's any herbicides that get rid of it, and it is a bugger to get rid of. Duckweed's manageable. If you don't like it, you can at least thin it out a little bit. But
I think there is you earlier on saying about the kind of myths and stuff like that. I think in some ways there's a myth that you can just tame a pond and
Yeah.
keep it the same forever. And
Yeah.
if you get blanketweed, that's a really bad thing. Goodness me, that's a terrible thing. So you need to get in there with some, cocktails that you pour in there and all this sort of stuff. And it's basically, as you say, I mean, the ponds, naturally is trying to get to that next stage of kind of bog garden, isn't it? So,
Yeah.
maybe it's time, as you say, it's a lot of work, but, time for a pond somewhere else if you can, or like rejig that current pond and send it back to the start of its life, I guess.
Because I've got some blanket weed in my pond, and I thought, right, okay, I'll take some of it out. But the amount of stuff living in it, I feel so guilty, and I've left it in now because I'll be ripping great chunks of it out, and then it's just brimming with hog lice and shrimps and dragonfly larvae. And I know that most of them will get back in the pond, but I'm like, well, I don't want any of these to dry out really. So I've started leaving it now. I don't lose too much sleep over it, and I don't think it's causing anything. Aesthetically, it might not look great, but I don't mind it. I've kind of left it in there now.
Yeah, and like sometimes some weeks, I think next week I suspect we're all going to have a bit of a wake up call because it's obviously quite nice hot weather, isn't it? And I think like those weeks are that's when I tend to manage it a bit. I call it pond yoga. I go out there quiet with my little stick, like a chimpanzee, like I've got my one tool that I go back to, and then the old sort of spaghetti twisting thing, and like a bit of that is okay. But as you say, it is difficult if you're counting the life of every single animal in your pond. It is really, really tricky to make sure, and I think I like, don't get me wrong, I like water lice. We have quite a lot of water hog lice in our pond, and sometimes I know that there's one or two of those that are getting put on the side. But yeah, often it's tadpoles and things like that you've got to watch out for as well. So
yeah, I mean the local blackbirds don't mind because they'll come in and polish off bits and bobs as well. I've noticed garden centres as well have started selling like freshwater mussels and snails to clean the pond. But I don't know if there's any truth behind that or if it's just kind of good marketing. I don't know. I know mussels siphon, but I don't know if they're going to siphon an entire pond. And snails, I would imagine snails would make it dirtier, if anything, because they're going to be crapping a lot. I don't know.
Yeah, I think I honestly don't know about mussels.
No, okay.
With snails, they're just moving it around. They're taking one form of energy, the algae, and they're turning it into just basically pooping it out, as you say, on the bottom into a different sort. But to be honest, the water lice and animals like that are going to eat that, and so the cycle sort of continues round. So you're not. Yeah, as you say, you're not getting rid of anything. It's just taking a different form in the pond.
Yeah,
but I mean, it's hilarious, isn't it? The idea of buying water snails. It's like if you're going to buy from a garden centre, the plants have nearly always got them on anyway.
Oh yeah. I mean, a good sized ram's horn was like £2. I thought, geez, I'm sitting on a fortune in my pond. I could go start walking down the street flogging ram's horn snails. I'll be able to pack my job in. But yeah, it's amazing what people pay for these sort of things. And with pond depth as well, that's another thing. There seems to be this is another one of those wives' tales, I guess, where you've got to have a deep pond in case it freezes. But you think about, like, when's the last time we had a winter where we got more than, I don't know, 2 or 3 inches of ice? So I guess as long as your pond is more than that, surely you're all good to go. I don't know. Everyone goes, you need to be 3 foot deep at least. You're like, whoa.
I think that's another example of where am I right in thinking that was the advice for fish in ponds?
Yeah, I guess it is.
Again, it's just sort of morphed and culturally warped into something else. But I agree. I think years ago, I don't know if you know this or not, but this is a bit weird. Not as weird as the duck vagina.
Okay, good.
But I started off on a frog helpline. That was my first job for like the first 5 years. This is before the internet. So, well, there was the internet, but if you had any problems...
Is this for like depressed frogs?
No, I wish.
Okay.
I wish that would be much easier. No, it was at Frog Life, and it was a phone line basically, and we did about 3,000 calls a year, and it was lovely. It was completely crazy, and you get such a broad view of the sort of loveliness of the wildlife conservation community.
Yeah,
absolutely lovely. But there was a point to this. What were we talking about? I've lost my thread.
Frozen ponds.
Oh yeah, that was it. Frozen ponds. So
why are we talking to each other?
Frozen ponds were, one of those things no one really had the right answer.
Okay.
But actually, Freshwater Habitats Trust have done some really interesting work, haven't they, on this? And actually, the ice, it can be bad for frogs. Obviously, winter kill, with frogs, particularly if your pond happens to have an absolutely enormous population of 50 or 60 frogs, depending on that pond, can be really serious in those ponds. But, according to their research, sweeping the snow off, actually it's the snow that's more of a problem, that's sort of limiting photosynthesis underneath the layer of ice, keeping that going, keeping the oxygen there, and then those frogs can basically carry on, breathing through their skin, and then jobs are good. And so I think the Freshwater Habitats Trust has done a particularly good job of trying to, separate myths from, potential future research projects, I guess.
Yeah, because I can't remember if I read it in your book, but I read it might have been Kate Bradbury's book, but someone where you get a saucepan of hot water and then you put that on the pond, which kind of slowly makes a hole in it, which seems like a good idea. But if it's really cold weather, it's going to freeze over in like a fairly short amount of time. So aesthetically, it's quite pleasing, but I don't think it actually does a lot of good. And I know that the classic one is a tennis ball, which I think I have tried, but that didn't do much good either. Although I don't know if the air can get through or something like that. I don't know. Tennis ball's a classic one, isn't it? Or some kind of ball.
Yeah, I have a little floated football in there. But, again, it would be really interesting to know the difference that kind of makes. What's really interesting is you often see the adult water boatmen and other water bugs, don't you, actually under the surface. And they're just, there's this tiny little layer. It actually has a word, little layer of air underneath the ice that those invertebrates sort of make use of in those winter months. So, it seems to be frogs that struggle the most.
Okay.
But everything else potentially can sort of keep going a bit.
Yeah. Okay, that's really interesting. And there can be, we mentioned kind of fish and wildlife, and I know one of the other things people can be concerned with is newts eating tadpoles, which I find. I know they do eat tadpoles, but again, I only can speak from my own pond, but I've got palmate and smooth newts in mine, and I've got loads of common frogs, and they eat a few of them, sure, but it doesn't mean you can't have both. I think it's just something that you have to be aware of, I guess.
The pattern, this is another, if anyone's listening to your podcast and wants to get into a really meaty research project, it would potentially be quite easy to do, is to, actually look at how garden pond populations of amphibians change over time. Because in my experience, frogs, they're quickest colonizers. This is their standard sort of, behavior, is to look for those ponds that no one else has yet found and exploit them, I suppose, before the predators get there. And then newts in every pond, well, in most of the ponds that I've dug in the past, newts sort of, they can be there at the start, but it's sort of like year 3 to 5 when they're sort of a regular presence in the pond. And often, that's the point in which frogs that did have 50 blobs of spawn slowly sort of start to deplete. So it might be that newts are out there performing a sort of balancing function, obviously unintentionally, but, frogs are really going to go crazy in those first months, bump up their numbers locally, and then find up opportunities kind of elsewhere. But, and that was probably, I mentioned about Hampton Court. That's the third question. How, we've got newts.
We'll go for all 10. We'll go for all of them.
Yeah.
But
we've got, the frogs are out, they've left us, and these blooming newts. And it's like, well, they're amphibians. Come on, they're great. They've got
enjoy the newts. Enjoy the newts. Exactly.
Newts. Yeah, definitely.
Because what I find is, they hit the tadpoles early on, but the tadpoles do eventually get so big that the newts would struggle to, the palmate and smooth anyway, would struggle to eat them. So they do kind of coexist. And also, because people get really protective over their tadpoles, there's some real, I was going to say nutters, that's not the right word, but passionate people, that's a much better way of putting it. Very passionate tadpole lovers out there. And they feed the tadpoles and they'll protect them. But if all of those tadpoles survive, was it 3,000 per clump, your garden would look like an Egyptian plague of frogs. Yeah. And inevitably, the vast majority of them are going to starve because there's not enough invertebrates. So either they can provide food for a newt early on, or you can have hundreds, if not thousands, starve in your garden, which is surely going to be more traumatic. So, you do want some predators in your pond, obviously, don't you, to kind of keep the balance, like you say.
I think what you said earlier on is the most important thing, is that the more complex the pond is, the more hiding places there are, the better the chances of survival. Because I think, let's be honest, in some garden ponds, when people have literally populations like of over 100, and they've got a lawn covered in froglets. It's great, but it's not really that sustainable, is it? You know, that shouldn't be the expectation, I suppose.
When the
The
lawnmower
expectation,
comes out, it's pretty
exactly.
gruesome.
Also, when you have a sudden dry day, and you know, and you can lose almost like a whole generation just from you know, them making the running the gauntlet across the lawn and then basically getting caught out. So yeah, it's a really tricky one, and it goes back to this idea we said before. There's not one pond, you know, there's not one standard pond. You know, ponds are really sort of dynamic, and they change every year, and that's, for me anyway, and I'm sure it's the same for you, that's the fun bit, you know.
Yeah, no, definitely. Yeah, I mean, how many ponds have I got? I think technically I've got 6, which sounds like a lot. Some of them are tiny. I mean, I've got a little front garden pond, which is literally just like a pre-formed one, because I moved into my house about a year and a half ago, and I couldn't dig the big pond, so I thought, let's just get that in. Let's just get a pond in. And even that, it's more of a bog now. It's like purple loose strife, and there's not a lot of water in it, but it does its job. And I've got a larger wildlife pond. I've got a raised fish pond. And then I've got amphibian and reptile enclosures as well, which all technically have ponds in them, but they're kind of closed off. Although things still find their way in them.
So is this for filming purposes as well as wildlife?
Yeah, partly. I mean, I just like keeping stuff. But yeah, it's like if someone says, "Oh, we need a photo of a roach," then I'll just go in pond because I've got a roach, you know, or various native fish in there. But I've got a European pond turtle, some yellow-bellied toads, and all kinds of menagerie of European and British animals that I keep. So yeah, it's interesting at night because you can hear things croaking and the neighbours like, "What's making that noise?" No idea, don't know. couldn't tell you. It must be a very poorly cat is making that noise. But
I love it. I love it. The kind of, it's become kind of well-worn advice about like one of the best things you can do for wildlife is to dig a pond.
Yeah,
you're like doing it for other people. This is great.
Yeah, well, hopefully, you know,
superb.
It's got to be done with wildlife ponds as well, because some people are unsure whether you need a pump or not. And I guess what the general advice is no. I don't know.
I think I'm talking here about kind of non-fish ponds, I suppose.
Yeah. That's what.
I've never really advised it in any way.
No.
You know, ponds in the wild don't come with a pump. That's kind of mostly what the plants are there to take hold of. And actually, I must say this again, nice little research project. If anyone's listening wants to tackle this, when I was at Hampton, so what's that? I think I can't remember quite, but I think it's like you speak to about, over the years, it's like 30,000 people. Of those 30,000 people, about 30 came up to me and said, "We use a pond pump made by the big pond pump makers, and their newts get trapped in it and they get kind of slaughtered." And like a couple of basically showing me photos, and I suspect that not all pumps are brilliant for newts. No. I'm not sure what it is about newts. It was never frogs they talked about. Newts, I suppose, do sort of shimmy into cracks and stuff like that.
Yeah.
But that was a bit, that was a bit unnerving, I suppose. So, not necessary.
No. I think that's right. I mean, to be fair, I don't have a pump on my fish pond. It's just I've tried to do it naturally. So, like you say, there's no pumps in nature. So, I've just done a marginal shelf, filled it with plants, and then I've dug it so it's about 4 foot deep. So I'm just hoping the volume of water and the plants take care of it, and the clarity is not bad at all, and the fish are fine. So I think as long as you're not drastically overstocking it, that's fine. But like I say, for wildlife ponds, then I don't ever see why you'd need a pump. I know some people like those solar powered ones, but again, I don't really think they're doing bugger all anyway, but I don't know.
Yeah, I went through a stage of always having those just in the summer. These little, they're like little fountains, aren't they?
Yeah.
Float on top, all solar powered. And I thought, I'm doing a good job, just keeping the oxygen levels topped up in the pond when it's incredibly hot. But as you say, I'm not sure we really know, massively whether that is helping or not. It's some people like it just because it looks quite nice. I don't think those things are doing any damage, which is the main thing.
No. Yeah, exactly. Exactly. That's the main thing. And the dreaded tap water, or talk about that quickly. Like, is it bad for ponds? Because I know like the advice is always fill it up with rain, but inevitably when you dig a pond, your rain butt's half empty or it's not going to rain for weeks. So you have to use tap water. Like, Is it better to just wait if you're patient, or is tap water the quick and easy fix?
Yeah, I mean, Freshwater Habitats Trust, their advice, they are, as I mentioned before, really, they're really trying to tackle these big questions.
Yeah.
And it's worth checking. I mean, if someone's listening to this in 2022,
You
know,
never
it's
know.
worth checking that
It might
advice.
be.
Yeah. But you know, you would want, I would check with them. But for me, it's like, do everything you can to naturally fill it with rainwater, even if that means if you've got a hardline pond, it will go a couple of weeks with only half full. Even in that situation, as long as it's a hard liner, I would say try and go for it. In my experience, as you say, we have to sometimes rely on it. But if you've got, like, you know, if the line is exposed, for instance, and you've literally got no other access, if there's no cover from pond plants and it's literally just, you know, the plastic liner is burning in the sun, then, you know, I would say that's one of those opportunities. But obviously it comes with a cost, and that cost is, you know, is that going to potentially more problems with blanketweed, duckweeds further down the line. I had to resort to it this year, and I realised my water butt hadn't been filling up, and I sort of cleaned out the pond, and then I was like, oh no, I've got no access to it. And I'll be honest, I haven't noticed a giant difference this year, but, you know, we haven't had as much sun this year compared to previous years. I personally don't think, anyway. So that's probably more responsible, you know, for it. But in a brand new pond, you know, with nothing in it, you just fill it with tap water, you'll notice a difference in those situations, I'd say.
I guess as well, when we were on about blanketweed and duckweed earlier, I bet if you ask those people, have you filled your pond up with tap water? And the ones who've got the serious problems, or think they've got a serious problem with it, it's probably tap water ponds, isn't it? Because the nutrients and whatever, it's just going to go nuts, isn't it? I guess. You mentioned the edge of liner then as well. What's the best way to hide liner? Because I've had a few ponds in my time. And it's one of my pet hates when the idea is you're trying to trick people. You want people to look at your pond and think, oh, wow, that's natural. But as soon as you see that horrible bloody black line around the edge, it just takes you out of it. And I'm not criticizing people because it is hard to make it look natural. Yeah. But like, is there a foolproof? Because I've tried all kinds. I think I got this from your book. But the way I did it was I did a little mini ledge and then another ledge. And I put a layer of sandstone all around the first ledge, and then I put a layer of sandstone on top of that, and then I filled it in with clay. So you can't see the liner around the edge that way. You can see it a bit if you look into the pond, but I'm not, you know, that's for nitpickers. Yeah. But that's how I did. But I don't know, is there a foolproof way, or how do you hide it?
No, I think there's a variety of different ways. The clay idea is a really nice one. Sometimes you need to top it up, don't you? If the water starts to wash away a bit, but that it can hide a multitude of sins. Yeah. I've used turf quite often in the past. You know, the turf strips. Ivy again, like, you know, you can buy that or take it, you know, and from elsewhere in the garden, and you know, that's another neat way. Sometimes I think that I agree with you, by the way, about, like, if you see the liner, you're like, oh, the mystery of the pond. Everyone can see what a fraud I am. Yeah. But I honestly think most people, I mean, that's one of the things that's in our head. I don't think most people go, oh my God, did you see Jack's garden? One of his 6 ponds. So, you know, it's not overly something.
And of course, the wildlife doesn't give a shit, does it? It's not like a frog's gonna go, oh no. So, you know, it's just us, isn't it? So, but it is one of those things that I'm like, good Lord, you never see it. So, yeah, I think you're right. It's not too difficult. The turf's a good idea because that's so easy to just bop it down, and you know, that's the last you think about. So I like
one of the tricky things. I don't know about you, but like one of the in fact, sourcing pictures for that book was really hard because a lot of ponds, it's like, this is a beautiful wildlife pond, and actually when you cost it out, you know, and they've got like slabs, or they've got you know, beautiful decorative rocks, or they're using washed beautiful Scottish pebbles or whatever. Actually, when you cost it out, that makes ponds. My worry is always that prices, you know, people out of the market, if you like. Yeah. And I think our aim, all of us as wildlife conservationists, is to show that, you know, ponds aren't just for rich people. You know, they're for people who, you know, anyone who wants to contribute, you know, should be able to do that. So, you know, turf can be a kind of quick and dirty, I suppose. The quick, cheap, certainly a cheaper alternative to having loads of decorative rocks, you know, to do that job.
Definitely. I mean, what I did with my sandstone, so I didn't pay for any of it. I just went on Facebook Marketplace because there's always someone who's backed into their own dry stone wall, and then they just want to get rid of it. So because I only had like a little Volkswagen at the time, so I did about 100 bloody trips to get this sandstone. But I just went to people's gardens that let me. I didn't nick it. That let me have it. So I got loads of it for free. So there are options. It's a little bit labor intensive, but if you did want the stone effect, you can get it for free. You've just got to keep putting out. But turf, that would be the easiest and probably cost-effective way, definitely.
But I think actually, but there are obviously benefits to you know, slabs, rocks, in that there's lots of cracks in there. Actually, you know, one of the problems, I'd say the only big problem with turf is that, you know, it's just not that, unless you let it grow, which we should all be doing, obviously. The cover, you know, it's open to when the froglets make their big journey, as you mentioned before, blackbirds in there hoovering them up, and you know, it's opportunity. But interesting.
The rocks are good, and the other thing you can do is plug a bit of clay and then put a plant in. So I mean, at the minute it looks like a bloody jungle because I've not been, obviously with my back, I've not been able to mow the lawn, so the garden is looking pretty feral, which I don't mind. I quite like that, but it's pretty bad out there. And kind of on that theme of cost effective, I guess. What's the kind of views on taking, say, plants or animals from other ponds? Because I know there's obviously the risk of disease and parasites, non-native species, but like as far as I'm aware, it's not illegal. I guess, is it frowned upon, or are there circumstances where you can? I don't know. What's your thoughts on it?
I think there's certainly, with some species, obviously, you know, there is illegal. You know, thank goodness. But I think mostly what I've always done is honestly, I hate Facebook, but I do think there is value in these sort of Facebook local community groups and stuff like that. Someone's like, okay, I've got this, you know, this pondweed is going spare. And this is one of the problems, really. You've got to be careful what you're getting, you know? So like, you know, having a quick scan online and just seeing what kind of, you know, whether the plants you thought they genuinely are those plants. But for me, that's always been the best and the cheapest route. Bluntly, I have not enough confidence in garden centres. Well, first of all, I think they're massively overcharging because plants are not massively labour intensive to grow. The species names, in my experience, you know, 75% of the time it's roughly the same as a native species, but often it's kind of not, you know, and so there's, you know, slight differences in species that they're using compared to the ones that we prefer to use. And also, I just think it was such a big wake-up call, Chytridiomycosis and rhinovirus in frogs. Really big wake-up call. And we've seen, obviously, on a human scale, how quickly diseases can travel. And I just feel like there might be something else out there that we don't yet know about that ends up causing loads of problems. So for me, like, keeping it sort of local is, you know, the best way, even if that means you're putting the call out there on a local community group to say, does anyone have any cuttings? Because I think a lot of us don't really think that. We think our ponds this is a really obscure and niche thing we do. It's like water in our garden, but actually a lot of other people might be out there, you know, looking to get their ponds that bit more established. The official advice is always let things colonize naturally. But I'm the first person to say, like, that's great advice, the best advice, but many people want to have their ponds that little bit more advanced and, you know, have the animals visiting that bit more quickly. So I'm kind of understanding of that need for some people, but, you know, there are many people who do just that. They got their nice circular, you know, their kidney-shaped hole, I suppose, in the garden, and they're just going to let it see what's there. But that's, you know, that's like hardcore ponding.
I mean, I guess if your pond is near a river or a lake within spitting distance, then stuff's going to colonize really quickly. But if you're in, you know, the middle of Manchester or London or something, and there's no water bodies particularly nearby, you're in a built-up area, chances are stuff obviously can find its own way, but it's probably going to take longer. And you know, I can understand the urge to just chuck a flag iris in the corner or something like that. So and I think that's sound advice. You know, if you are going to get stuff, try and just get it as close as possible, because chances are whatever that thing is, it might have found its way to your pond at some point anyway. So if it's local, it's, you know, so no, I think that's that makes a lot a lot of sense. I'll end on this last one because you'll be pondered out otherwise. But one of the things that people flag up is when they dig a new pond, within a couple of weeks, it's chock-a-block with mosquitoes or mosquito larvae.
Yeah.
So is this a thing that is it a problem, or is it just part of the pond process, like you say?
Do you know, earlier on I said, if anyone's listening to this in the future, this is one of those things that I absolutely got to check, because I think we are treading quite a fine balance. So I was one of those that said, look, if you don't like mosquitoes, don't maybe a pond near your back door is not a great idea.
Yeah.
Because as you say, in those early years, they because it's an empty space, of course, they can reproduce pretty quickly. Most mosquitoes don't necessarily emerge and just go, right then, let's drink some blood. You know, a lot of them will go off. You often find them near sheds and things like that. That's because they're very sort of sensitive in those earliest moments. And so it's not necessarily that they just come and hunt you straight away. You know, a lot of them do need that time elsewhere, sheltered, shaded, kind of out of the way. So that kind of works in our effect. And the other positives, there are loads of positives to, you know, mosquitoes in that, you know, most of them are going to become bat food. 50% of them are males, and they're just, you know, pretty pollinators, I suppose. But okay, so that's the good side. That's really good. And also, of course, the mosquito larvae themselves bring in predators. So, I mean, many of your listeners, and you will have seen this yourself, you know, in those early days, at this time of year, there are diving beetles all over the place, and they're just literally looking at the floor from on high and landing in ponds and just scoping them out. So even, I would say, in this time of year, if you dig a pond at this time of year, you can expect that to happen within 2 days. There to be beetles in there hunting, looking for opportunities. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Great diving beetles. Like, it's absolutely amazing. Yeah. So that's the good news. The concern, I suppose, is not only that we end up with currently non-native mosquitoes naturally colonizing Britain because of climate change. It's almost certain that eventually that's going to happen. And when that happens, all of us as a sort of conservation movement are going to have to really carefully consider our advice about ponds, because I've learned this firsthand, is that you can't go to an American audience and say, hey guys, get digging. Hey, you live in Florida, dig a pond, help wildlife. Because, you know, that is absolutely not necessarily the great advice for human health. So I'm dreading it. If I'm honest, I'm absolutely dreading that moment, because I think, you know, we're going to have to rethink how we you know, the advice that we give. So that's a concern for the future. It might be 2 years, it might be 10 years, it might be 25 years, but I think that's something that's going to be out there.
This is presumed. Sorry, Jules. This is presumably because you're worried about mosquitoes carrying things like malaria, is it? Yes.
Sorry. Yeah.
No. Sorry, just making it clear. So yeah, that makes sense.
So that's the concern. Currently, I can't remember what they're called. It's like the Mosquito Group, the official mosquito sort of scientists, you know, say that ponds, you know, in Britain, it's still the best advice. It's still, you know, the thing you should do if you like for wildlife, and there is no threat to humans. Now, the reason I say humans is because we are gaining more knowledge about one of the main mosquito species, the one that kind of dangles down. So normally you get the ones that sort of on the surface, the larvae that sort of swim a bit like tadpoles, and then the ones that dangle their tails downwards.
Yes, yeah.
And the downward pointing ones can spread malaria around birds. So a lot of you know, malaria deaths don't necessarily happen to humans. This is a clutch of nasties basically that can affect different groups. So there's potentially a welfare argument there, and there is a team of scientists, and momentarily I've forgotten from which university they're working, but they're, you know, assessing, I suppose, the risk to local populations of birds. Now, my advice would be to say, do you know what? If you've got a bucket around the back of the shed and it's filled with water, if you've got, you know, litter around the back of, you know, where you keep your bins or whatever, and, you know, you've got old compost bags and water's collecting in them, if you've got, you know, plant pots that have fallen over and they're filling with water, that's where the bulk of mosquitoes are going to be going. So hopefully, if we get rid of that side of things and maintain wildlife ponds as a sort of service for communities, we'll be able to weather that storm. But I do sense it's coming, unfortunately.
Because I guess the other thing is mosquitoes, once a pond is established, I don't know if they actively avoid it, but they certainly try not to, because there's so many predators in there, isn't there? Everything loves to eat mosquito larvae. So I guess it's probably a last resort, a wildlife pond. But like you say, if there's just some little bit of water hidden in the garden, that's where they want to be, because it's predator free and doesn't take them long to come out. You probably see a surge in stickleback sales, because they're the kind of European mosquito fish, aren't they? They'll it's normally my dog. It's normally my dog that kicks up. What have you got? What dog is it?
Oz. He's a whippet, sort of beddling, a lurcher, basically.
Lurcher, okay, yeah.
He only barks when we have a delivery or something like that. And even I'm like, bloody hell, it's a loud bark.
Yeah. Yeah, I've got a Dachshund which thinks she's a Doberman, so she
really
she keeps up.
I wish I had that level of bravado. You know what I mean? That you can just be like instantly like, I don't care about my size. Let's go. You know?
Yeah, no, she does.
So I think like, you know, I would hate for people to think, oh my gosh, my wildlife pond is potentially a dangerous place. It definitely isn't, but it's a debate we'll have to come back to. But for now, it's a brilliant thing to do.
Yeah, and I think that's the way to go. Jules is just muzzling the dog now, trying to get it under control.
Right, okay. Hopefully we're okay.
You've tamed it. Well, to be honest, we're at the end now anyway, so no worries. But look, it's been an absolute pleasure to talk about ponds with you and kind of cover some of those common questions and myths, and hopefully that's helped some people out when they're with their own wildlife ponds and if they're thinking about doing a wildlife pond.
Yeah, absolutely. Honestly, it's a real pleasure. So thank you for having me on, and, you know, let's keep ponding.
That's it. If people want to get your book as well, is there a preferred, you know, is it just anywhere, or is there somewhere you'd rather people get your book from?
Yes, came prepared.
That's it, yeah.
To be honest, just get it from a really nice bookseller that you love.
Yeah. Okay.
Or, you know,
avoid the dreaded Amazon.
I guess so, you know, but if you do use Amazon, then just leave a nice review.
Yeah. And on that note,
thanks, Jack. Very nice to meet you and see your lovely. So we got these perch in the background.
These are perch that I've got. Yeah. So there's 4 of them. There's one that's significantly smaller than the other 3. So I'm a little bit worried that one might go one morning. So I might have to move it out at some point. But yeah, keeps me busy. Look, pleasure, Jules. Take care, buddy.
All right. Cheers. See you later.